Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, well, we're tackling a case that I think just about everyone has heard of, maybe thinks they know, the JonBenét Ramsey case.
It's definitely one of those cases lodged in the public consciousness.
Right, and we've pulled together quite a bit of source material for this, really leaning on a deep analysis that synthesizes, police reports, interviews, court documents, media, forensics, all of it.
Yeah, it tries to cut through some of the noise.
Exactly. So our mission here isn't to push one theory, but to walk you through the factual nuances, the conflicting accounts that come up in these sources.
So you can get a clearer sense of just how complex, how layered this whole thing really is, because it is incredibly complex and still unsolved.
Absolutely. Let's dive in. Okay, so setting the scene. It's the day after Christmas, December 26, 1996.
Right. Very early morning.
And the first official record we have is Patsy Ramsey's 911 call. It comes in at 5:52 a.m. She's distraught, reports a kidnapping, says there's a ransom note.
And crucially, says her daughter, JonBenét, is gone. The sources also note she made 2 more calls right after that 911 call.
Who did she call?
Friends, the Whites and the Fernies, asking them to come over right away.
Okay. And police response.
Very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Officer Rick French arrives just 3 minutes later, 5:55 a.m. He's the first one there.
And his initial actions, what did he see?
Well, his report mentions a quick search of the house. He noted no obvious signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle that he could see.
And no JonBenét.
No JonBenét. But, it's worth remembering the house itself.
It was huge, right?
Yeah, the analysis highlights it's over 6,000 square feet, multiple levels. So a quick initial walkthrough, it might not catch everything.
Fair point. And then things start to get chaotic, scene-wise.
It's putting it mildly. Within about 15 minutes of Officer French getting there, those friends Patsy called start arriving.
The Whites, the Fernies.
Yep. And even the Fanny Priest gets contacted and shows up pretty quickly, too.
So you've got the first officer on scene, and then almost immediately, a whole group of non-essential people walking into what could be a crime scene.
Exactly. And this influx, well, the Boulder Police Department got heavily criticized for it later. There was just a complete lack of scene control from the get-go.
Was any part secured initially?
According to the analysis, only JonBenét's bedroom was eventually cordoned off. And that wasn't until much, much later, like 5 hours after French first arrived.
5 hours. Wow. And the rest of the house?
Basically described as a free-for-all. People were moving around, potentially touching things. It's an investigator's nightmare.
Yeah, you're potentially losing or contaminating evidence right from the start.
Precisely. Which brings us to one of the key pieces of evidence found early on. The ransom note.
Found by Patsy, right, on the stairs.
That's what she reported. And the analysis really digs into how unusual this note was. It wasn't typical.
How so?
Well, first, it was long. 3 pages, handwritten on a notepad from inside the house. It demanded a very specific sum, $118,000.
That's oddly specific. Same amount as John Ramsey's bonus, wasn't it?
It matched his bonus from the previous year, yes. The note also focused heavily on John and his business, used phrases like Southern common sense, and some language that people thought might have been lifted from movies like Dirty Harry or Ransom.
And it had that signature SBLC victory.
Right at the end, yes. SBLC victory. And crucially, it contained a very clear instruction. Don't call the police.
Okay, but here's where things get complicated, according to the source material. Patsy's account of reading the note.
Yes, there's a conflict highlighted. In the actual 911 call, she mentions the sign-off SBLC victory.
Which is on page 3.
Exactly. Implying she must have read the whole thing or at least scanned to the end. But later, in that CNN interview they did.
The one on January 1st.
That's the one. She said she only read maybe the first line or two, that it wasn't really registering because she was so panicked.
So the conflict is, how did she know not to call the police if she only read the first bit? That instruction wasn't at the very beginning.
Precisely. The analysis points this out as a significant inconsistency in her early statements. It's one of those details that raises immediate questions.
And that lack of scene control we talked about, it didn't get better.
No, it continued throughout the morning. The house remained full of people, friends, family. Police were coming and going.
And then the search shifts focus.
Later that morning, yeah. The timing is a bit fuzzy in the accounts, but John Ramsay starts searching the basement. Detective Linda Arndt actually suggested he do a top-to-bottom search.
And that's when?
That's when he finds JonBenét's body in a room often called the wine cellar.
And the contamination issues just exploded at that point, didn't
Immediately, the analysis emphasizes how severe it was. John Ramsay carried her body upstairs.
move the body himself.
Yes, covered her with a blanket. Then Patsy reportedly lay down on her body, praying. Any forensic evidence on JonBenét, on her clothing, on the blanket used to carry her, it's all compromised.
And wasn't there tape involved?
Yes, there was duct tape over her mouth. John reportedly ripped it off when he found her.
And left it where?
Left it in the basement. So that piece of evidence was disturbed, moved from its original position on the body before investigators could document it properly.
It sounds like a cascade of errors.
It really does. The sources mention Detective Art was making repeated calls to 911, getting increasingly urgent, demanding an ambulance, demanding the coroner, because there were delays in getting them dispatched.
Just chaos.
Pretty much sums it up, yeah. A chaotic scene, compromised from multiple angles, almost immediately.
So in those first hours, day one, how are the police actually treating the Ramseys? Were they suspects yet?
The initial instruction, according to the analysis, was to treat them as victims. Grieving parents of a kidnapped child.
Were there any interviews?
Some brief interactions. Burke, the brother, apparently told police things were normal at home, no abuse. Linda Arndt did speak with John Ramsay for about 40 minutes later that evening, after they'd gone to a friend's house.
But things shifted.
Yeah, there was a turning point. John Ramsay recounts getting advice, reportedly, from someone in HR at his company, Access Graphics.
What was the advice?
Basically, that the police were already looking at him and Patsy as suspects, and they needed to lawyer up. Immediately.
And did they?
They did. They first called Mike Bynum, who was their corporate lawyer, and he then connected them with a prominent criminal defense firm, Hayden, Morgan, and Foreman.
The analysis calls them big guns, right? Politically connected.
Exactly. Not your average local lawyers.
And what did these new lawyers advise?
Their assessment, according to the source material, was that the police had zeroed in on the family and were going to put pressure on them. So they advised against doing any formal, extensive interviews right away.
Even though the police wanted one, I think they asked for one on December 28th.
They did, but the lawyers said no, not yet. Now, the Ramsay perspective presented in the source is that they did talk to police on the 26th, at the house, at the friend's house later. They felt they answered questions that day.
But the formal sit-down interviews, that cooperation stopped after the lawyers got involved.
Correct. And that became, a huge point of contention. Police felt stonewalled. The Ramseys felt they were following legal advice because they were being unfairly targeted.
This is already so tangled. Okay, so they have a memorial service in Colorado, December 28th.
Yes. But then they decide to leave Boulder.
Where do they go?
Back to Atlanta. John explained this was where their main support system was, felt more like home. They also planned JonBenét's burial there, next to her older half-sister.
And his company helped facilitate that.
Yes, Access Graphics, which had been bought by Lockheed Martin, provided a plane for them.
And then, just days later, New Year's Day, 1997, they do that CNN interview.
Highly controversial. John Ramsay himself later said he thought it was a mistake.
Why did they do it then? What was their stated purpose?
According to the source analysis, they wanted to go public with their unhappiness about how the Boulder PD was handling things. They felt resources were being misdirected, focusing on them instead of an intruder.
And they announced their own investigation.
Yes, their own team of investigators, and offered a reward, trying to take control of the narrative, perhaps.
John also gave a specific reason, didn't he? Something about friends pushing him.
Yeah, he mentioned friends in Boulder urged them to do it, saying it was to protect Boulder, which he apparently found kind of strange.
And Patsy's demeanor in that interview, it drew a lot of comment.
It really did. The source material notes she seemed possibly medicated. It describes her as being pretty much out of it in the days leading up, needing help with basic things like eating or bathing.
Which raises the question, how much can you really judge someone's demeanor just 1 week after their child has been brutally murdered?
It's a valid point debated in the analysis. Is it fair? Is it even possible? But regardless of fairness, the perception was damaging.
How so?
The interview, especially with those inconsistencies we talked about, like her reading the ransom note, it seemed to rub a lot of people the wrong way. And it reportedly just intensified the police focus on them.
So instead of maybe generating sympathy or deflecting suspicion, it kind of backfired.
That seems to be the assessment presented in the source. It amplified the scrutiny.
Okay, let's shift to the physical evidence. The autopsy findings. This is crucial.
Absolutely. A lot hinges on the interpretation of the physical evidence. First, The ligature around her neck.
The cord and the paintbrush handle?
Right. Described as a white cord tied with a piece of a broken paintbrush handle used as a sort of tourniquet. The analysis notes it wasn't a true garrote, in the technical sense, more like a noose, and the knots weren't seen as particularly sophisticated.
And the paintbrush handle came from where?
Traced back to Patsy's art supplies in the house. That's a key link to the house.
But the cord itself?
That's where it gets interesting. According to the analysis citing investigator Lou Smith, the cord was not sourced to anything found within the Ramsey home.
Okay, so the handle is from the house, the cord isn't. That's important.
Very important, especially for the intruder theory. Then there's the head injury.
Described as severe blunt force trauma.
Extremely severe. A piece of her skull was fractured and pushed inward. An 8-inch crack. Devastating injury.
And the cause of death.
Officially listed as asphyxiation by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. So both the strangulation and the head injury contributed. And importantly, she was alive when the choking started. But the strangulation details are complex.
How so?
Well, there were marks on the outside of her neck, signs of choking like petechial hemorrhages, those tiny burst blood vessels. But significantly, there was no internal damage to the structures of her neck.
What does that suggest?
It suggests the initial choking might not have been forceful enough to kill her instantly. This leads to debate about the sequence of events.
Like, was she hit first, then strangled? Or maybe choked lightly, then hit, and the swelling from the hit tightened the cord later?
Exactly. The source notes authorities lean towards asphyxiation happening about 45 minutes after the head blow. Lou Smith, though, believed the head blow came after the choking, possibly as part of a sexual assault. Conflicting expert interpretations.
Were there other restraints?
Yes. A similar white cord was found loosely tied around one wrist. The knots were described as loose, maybe not even functionally restraining. Again, debated as staging, or maybe it just came loose.
And the duct tape we mentioned?
The one John ripped off. Lou Smith's analysis, cited in the source, concluded that the tape, like the cord, was not sourced to the Ramsey house. Another point for the intruder possibility.
Any other unusual items found?
There was a Barbie nightgown found in the basement room where the body was discovered. It wasn't what she was wearing. Its condition, why it was there. Unclear. Just another odd detail.
What was she wearing?
A white shirt she'd worn to a Christmas party the night before, white long john thermal pants, and underneath those, size 12 underwear.
And there was evidence of urination.
Yes, urine stains primarily on the front of the long johns and underwear. This suggested she was likely lying face down when her bladder released, probably around the time of death or shortly after.
But the analysis raises a question about that, doesn't it?
It does. If her clothes were saturated while face down, shouldn't there have been a corresponding urine stain or puddle found on the floor where she was initially discovered? The absence of such a finding leads some to speculate about potential cleanup.
And this ties into her history of bedwetting.
Yes. Leaked medical records confirm JonBenét had issues with bedwetting, sometimes soiling. Patsy acknowledged this, apparently viewed it as normal childhood stuff, even had pull-ups for her. But this detail became central to Detective Steve Thomas's theory.
His theory being that maybe an accident related to wetting the bed somehow escalated.
That was the core of his speculation. A sudden rage incident following a wetting accident leading to the injury, and then a cover-up staged to look like a kidnapping.
What about fiber evidence? That's always key.
Fibers were found. Some on the duct tape, the ligature cord, and the blanket John used to carry her were consistent with a jacket Patsy owned.
Okay, that points towards her potentially being involved in handling those items.
Potentially. There were also black fibers found in JonBenét's underwear that might have been consistent with a sweater John owned, though the source notes this detail primarily emerged in a 2000 interview with Patsy, so the context might be skewed.
But were there other fibers too?
Yes. Crucially, the analysis points out many other fibers were found that couldn't be linked to anyone in the family or the house. And, fibers transfer easily, laundry, just living life.
Yeah.
It doesn't automatically mean involvement.
So the physical evidence picture is mixed. Some things point potentially towards the family or the house. Other key things, the cord, the tape reportedly don't.
Exactly. It's full of ambiguities and contradictions, which is why different theories can find some support in the physical evidence, but none find conclusive proof.
And while all this forensic analysis was happening, the media attention was just relentless.
Off the charts, especially the tabloids. They were camped out, following the Ramseys everywhere. It was a full-blown media circus.
And there were leaks, sensitive information getting out.
Yeah, major leaks. Autopsy photos somehow got to the Globe tabloid. JonBenét's medical records were leaked. Highly sensitive stuff entering the public domain.
How did that happen? Was it accidental?
Well, the analysis points to a deposition given years later where it was alleged that police investigators were actually strategically leaking information to certain reporters.
Why would they do that?
The alleged goal was to put pressure on the Ramseys, make them feel cornered, maybe force them to cooperate more, or make a mistake.
Wow. That speaks to a real breakdown in trust and maybe procedure.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just between the police and the Ramseys. There was also a growing, very public rift between Boulder Police Department and the district attorney's office, led by Alex Hunter at the time.
So the investigating agencies weren't even on the same page.
Not by a long shot, according to the source material.
Mhm.
Different philosophies, different approaches, maybe different agendas.
This intense period also saw relationships fracturing, didn't it? Like between the Ramseys and the Whites.
Yes, Fleet and Priscilla White, who were very close friends and among the first people at the house that morning, their relationship with the Ramseys completely broke down.
What happened there? The sources mention some specific incidents.
Several unsettling ones. Priscilla White reportedly said something to Patsy in Atlanta, something like, "I know what's going on. Give me a few minutes. I could let you in on some things."
Did Patsy take up on it?
No, she didn't follow up. Later said she regretted it. But the analysis leaves you wondering, what did Priscilla think she knew?
And Fleet White. There was something about his reaction in the basement.
Yeah, an account describes him flipping out down there after the body was found. Patsy apparently told police she wasn't having that conversation and didn't know what set him off. John said he didn't recall it.
Again, the analysis asks, why wouldn't you ask your close friend what was wrong at a moment like that?
It seems odd, yeah. Then there was a really dramatic incident at a church.
What happened there?
Fleet reportedly burst into a meeting the Ramseys were having with their priest. He seemed agitated, maybe manic. He handed John a business card from a journalist.
With something written on it.
Yes, according to Patsy's recollection, a note questioning who removed the tape, John or Fleet, and questioning the timeline of the basement discovery. Fleet then allegedly said something like, "They're after me and my family now," and he'd handle it his way.
That's intense. And the note mentioned the tape removal and the basement timing, things already under scrutiny.
Exactly. It suggests those questions were circulating early on. The source also notes Fleet demanded another meeting later at someone else's office.
But despite all this friction, this drama, the Whites were never suspects.
No, the source material is clear on that. Never considered suspects by BPD or anyone else. They cooperated fully. They were actually critics of how the investigation was handled later on.
So their behavior, the estrangement, it's another layer of complexity without a clear explanation provided in the sources.
Right, just more questions about interpersonal dynamics amidst a tragedy. And this breakdown, this tension, it really came to a head with the police versus the DA conflict.
Which was publicly exposed by Detective Steve Thomas's resignation.
Yes, his 1998 resignation letter was scathing and made the conflict impossible to ignore.
What were his main accusations against the DA's office?
The source summarizes them basically. He accused Alex Hunter's office of completely mishandling and crippling the investigation. He cited political interference, egos, philosophical clashes,
Specific examples?
delays in getting warrants, hindering basic requests, the DA's office apparently stating early on that the case wasn't prosecutable, and preventing key detectives, like himself, from being advisory witnesses for the grand jury.
So he felt the DA essentially shut down any chance of successful prosecution, particularly against the Ramseys.
That was clearly his belief. Deep frustration and a feeling that the DA's office had effectively killed the case he was building.
And this all plays out publicly.
Yeah, adding even more fuel to the firestorm surrounding the case.
Okay, so after all that conflict, a grand jury is convened, 1998 to 1999.
Yes. And they hear from a lot of witnesses, Detective Arndt, Burke Ramsey, the pilot, the Whites.
But not Steve Thomas, and not John and Patsy.
Correct. They were notably not called to testify before the grand jury.
Then, in October 1999, the DA, Alex Hunter, makes an announcement.
He does. He says the grand jury has finished its work and, quote, no charges have been filed. He emphasized the secrecy of the proceedings.
And the public takeaway from that was?
Generally, that the grand jury had looked at the evidence and decided not to indict. That the Ramseys were effectively cleared. That was the widespread impression.
But that wasn't the full story.
Not at all. The bombshell dropped years later in 2013. A local newspaper, the Daily Camera, sued to unseal some documents.
And what did they reveal?
That the grand jury did vote to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey.
On what charges?
2 counts each. Accessory to a crime specifically related to hindering the investigation or discovery of the perpetrator, and child abuse resulting in death. The child abuse charge related to knowingly placing the child in a situation that unreasonably endangered her life, leading to her death.
So Hunter's statement, no charges have been filed, was technically true because he hadn't filed them, but incredibly misleading because the grand jury had voted to indict.
Precisely. The analysis points out how carefully worded his statement was. There was debate presented in the source about whether he was legally required to sign and file the indictment the grand jury returned. Apparently, Colorado law at the time was ambiguous.
And it's important to understand the difference in legal standards here, right? Indictment versus conviction.
Yes, very important. A grand jury indictment just means they found probable cause, enough evidence to think a crime was probably committed and that these individuals probably did it. It's a lower bar than conviction, which requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
So the grand jury saw enough for probable cause on those specific charges, but the DA chose not to proceed.
Correct. He declined to sign the indictment, so no charges were formally filed.
Let's talk about the DNA, because that became a huge factor later on.
A very significant piece. The analysis lays out the timeline. Some basic indication of unknown male DNA was found early, 1997. But technology improved.
And by 2003?
They developed a full DNA profile of an unknown male, found in several key places. Touch DNA on the waistband of JonBenét's underwear, under her fingernails, and also on the ligature cord.
A full profile, good enough for CODIS, the national database.
Yes, good enough to be entered and searched against convicted offenders and other crime scene profiles.
Yeah.
The analysis also notes it might be complex, potentially more than one contributor, but a clear unknown male profile was identified.
And the crucial finding regarding the family.
The Ramseys, John, Patsy, and Burke were all excluded. Their DNA did not match this unknown male profile found on the body.
That must have felt like vindication for them.
It led to a major public statement in 2008. The new DA, Mary Lacey, wrote a formal letter to John Ramsey.
What did it say?
She apologized for the suspicion they had lived under and stated that, based specifically and firmly on this DNA evidence, the immediate family was no longer considered suspects. They would be treated as victims.
This was after Patsy had died, though.
Yes, Patsy passed away from cancer in 2006, so she didn't live to see that official letter.
And that DNA profile, has it ever hit in CODIS?
No. After nearly 20 years in the system, still no match.
But now, there's a complication. Something recent.
A potentially huge complication. The source analysis highlights an ongoing investigation, current as of late 2024, into a longtime analyst at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Missy Woods.
Was she accused of?
Allegations include manipulating DNA data, altering test results, cutting corners, serious misconduct affecting potentially hundreds of cases she worked on between 2008 and 2023. And her earlier work, back to 1994, is now under review.
Oh, wow. Could that impact the Ramsey case DNA?
That's the massive question the analysis raises. John Ramsey has apparently been told she didn't work directly on their case samples, but the investigation is ongoing, and the review spans the relevant period.
So if the testing or the interpretation or the data entry related to that crucial DNA profile was somehow flawed because of this analyst's alleged actions.
What does that mean? Does it invalidate the profile? Can the evidence even be retested effectively after all this time? Does it put the family back under a cloud of suspicion if the basis for their exclusion is questioned?
It throws a huge wrench into what seemed like the most solid piece of evidence pointing away from the family.
Absolutely. It adds a whole new layer of uncertainty just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated.
Okay, so with all this back and forth, the conflicting evidence, the controversies, let's talk about the main theories that persist, as presented in the source material. None proven, but persistent.
Right. First, there's the intruder theory. This is the one the Ramseys and their investigator Lou Smith strongly supported.
What's the core argument?
That someone broke into the house that night. Potential entry points get debated. A basement window near where a suitcase was found, maybe an unlocked door, mention of missing keys.
And the evidence supporting it.
Primarily, the items reportedly not sourced to the house, the ligature cord, and the duct tape. Also, the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét. Motives discussed range from a random sexual predator, given the assault evidence, to someone specifically targeting John Ramsey, given the ransom note's focus.
Although John himself found the note didn't quite fit a sexual motive.
Yeah, he acknowledged that mismatch, but also said, trying to make logical sense of a criminal's actions is often impossible. Lou Smith also had his stun gun theory based on marks on her back, but that interpretation is debated.
And other specific intruders were looked at over the years.
Many. The source mentions a few high-profile ones: the Santa impersonator, pageant photographer, Gary Oliva, John Mark Carr, who falsely confessed. But all were eventually cleared, often by DNA comparison. None matched the profile.
Okay, then there's the theory involving Burke, the brother.
Yes, this gained more traction publicly, especially after the grand jury indictments were revealed in 2013, because those charges, accessory, child abuse resulting in death, seemed potentially consistent with the scenario involving a cover-up by the parents.
What's the typical scenario proposed?
Often involves Burke possibly striking JonBenét accidentally, maybe during a squabble over food, like the pineapple found in her system. Then the parents find out and stage the kidnapping to protect their son.
Burke addressed this directly, didn't he, in that Dr. Phil interview?
We did in 2016. Flatly denied any involvement, called the speculation a media circus. But he also said something interesting in that interview.
What was that?
He stated that he did go downstairs after everyone else was supposedly asleep to build a toy.
Why is that significant?
Because, as the source analysis points out, it seems to directly contradict the official statement of fact that was part of his settlement in a defamation lawsuit against CBS.
What did that legal document say?
It stated, Burke was not awakened and did not leave his bedroom after being put to bed that night. The analysis calls that legal document the de facto record for the suit.
So his TV statement conflicts with the agreed-upon facts in his own successful lawsuit? That's confusing.
It is. The analysis questions that contradiction, what does a child really remember years later versus what gets established legally? It leaves that inconsistency hanging.
Is there any other expert opinion mentioned regarding the family's involvement?
The source does quote an email from John Douglas, the well-known FBI behavioral analyst.
What was his take?
He stated firmly his belief that the Ramseys were innocent victims of investigative incompetence and media sensationalism, not murderers. He apparently consulted verbally with the BPD early on, but felt they were wrongly fixated on the family.
So expert opinions remain divided, too. We have these competing theories, intruder versus Burke family cover-up, each with points for and against, but nothing definitive emerging from the sources.
That's pretty much the state of play. The case remains officially unsolved. No match to that DNA profile after all these years.
Have there been any recent developments? Any new pushes?
The source mentions a cold case review team looked at it again, made some recommendations in 2023, but the specifics aren't public.
And the current DA and BPD?
They've made public statements about renewed commitment, using new technology, collaborating, the usual assurances in high-profile cold cases.
But John Ramsey has expressed some concerns.
Yeah, interviews included in the source material indicate he's worried about the actual physical evidence. Having trouble getting straight answers, he says, about whether it's secure, where it is, if it's even still viable for the latest testing methods. He fears it might be lost, or maybe being protected from re-examination.
And layered on top of all that is the uncertainty from the CBI lab investigation.
Exactly. That ongoing review of analyst Missy Wood's work casts a potential shadow over the DNA evidence that had seemed like the one clear point of exclusion for the family.
So, after digging through all this analysis, all these details, where does it leave you, the listener? It seems the clearest takeaway is just how murky this case remains.
Absolutely. The sources we've explored reveal this complex web of contradictions in statements, in evidence interpretation, conflicts between the police and the DA, debates that rage on decades later.
And a fundamental lack of certainty about what truly happened that night in December 1996. Who was involved? Why did it happen?
Even with the DNA excluding the family based on Mary Lacy's 2008 assessment and these persistent theories, nobody has been brought to justice. No one definitively identified.
It makes you wonder, given all these conflicting pieces, the debates, the potential new questions about the DNA, can anyone outside the investigation really claim to know what happened? Are we all just looking at fragments?
Maybe. And the big question now is, what's next? If that critical DNA evidence is compromised, where does the investigation go? Is there still evidence locked away that holds the key, waiting for technology to catch up, assuming it still exists and is testable? The future seems as tangled as the past.